On September 23rd, 2024, these 4 cards were banned: Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, Dockside Extortionist, and Nadu Winged Wisdom. We are going to be talking about how that affects gameplay. A few things that I want to say before we discuss the gameplay aspect of many high-powered decks. This is a huge financial blow to a lot of people, and that really sucks, and I'm sorry. When something bad happens, it's appropriate to have negative emotions. We have the right to feel those things. What it does not give us the liberty to do is to threaten people, or to dox people, or have the intent to harm any other human beings. The people who made those rules are human beings, and those things that they decided does affect the game that we love. But we gotta remember that it is a game. So with that being said, let's proceed and let's talk about a few ways that this affects gameplay, specifically in the higher powered realm, potentially CEDH. We are going to discuss how that changes the strategy of many decks, many high-powered CEDH tournament level decks. We're going to discuss how we can pivot some of those strategies and maybe even some replacements for these cards. These cards, in many cases, are considered auto-includes by a lot of individuals who play higher power decks. And so when you have something that is considered that, what do we do to change it? If you would, take a second to drop a like and subscribe, share the video, it would help out a ton. With that being said, let's talk about gameplay. I don't believe Blue Farm is dead by any means. It's still an incredibly powerful deck. It still has many win lines. It still has so many amazing cards in the deck. I don't believe it has lost too much speed on average. I think what it has lost is those super explosive starts where you pump out a Kraum early or where you get a win early. But I would like to say that getting that win early is not the main goal of this deck. The longer the games go, the more likely it is that you are going to win based on how many card advantage engines are in the deck. So the big loss is getting those card advantage engines out earlier. But other than that, I believe this deck is still very viable. I have played a few games with it post-ban and have had some success. Like I have mentioned, or like I will continue to mention, I think that those bannings have just evened out, made the deck more consistent in its draws, and those super explosive turns are probably not going to be as common. In front of us is one of the most high-powered decks out there. It is Tymna Kraum, also known as Blue Farm. A link to the deck list to Moxfield can be found below. If you would take a second to go check that out. I created a longer video that goes more in depth of the strategy that this deck uses. Now, this particular deck list lost 3 cards that were banned. It used Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, and Mana Crypt. All 3 of those were part of a strategy. The Jeweled Lotus, more specifically, was used to power out an early Kraum and get some card advantage, or power out an early Tymna, also for card advantage. The Mana Crypt had a similar role of trying to get things out quickly and go as fast as possible. Now, this particular deck is not a turbo deck. It can have some very early wins, but that's not its main strategy. So losing Mana Crypt isn't incredibly bad for the deck. It still sucks a little bit, but having those banned, it kind of levels things out, levels your turns out, levels your opening hand in a lot of cases, makes it a little bit more consistent, which isn't necessarily a good thing. This deck is a little bit slower. It's considered a mid-range deck, and it uses a lot of card advantage engines, such as Phyrexian Metamorph, to get a 1-ring or a 1-ring. Of course, Rhystic Study. It's commanders, Mystic Remoras, and you're looking for these early in the game to get some card advantage, control the board, and go for a combo win later. So how does this deck win, and how do those bannings affect the win? One of the easiest ways to win is an intuition line for Underworld Breach, Savine's Reclamation, and one of the mana rocks, Lion's Eye Diamond. So the idea behind that is if you get Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Savine's Reclamation from your intuition, your opponent has to choose 2 to go into the graveyard, 1 into your hand, and it doesn't really matter what they choose to some extent if you have enough cards in the graveyard or have enough mana available. Then you can go for a Brain Freeze line to either mill yourself out and get a Thassa's Oracle, or mill your opponents out and cast a Wheel of Fortune to make them draw a card on an empty library. So that's a very common win. It runs the classic Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation line. It also runs this card, Ad Nauseam. Love the Altar. And with that Ad Nauseam, you can go through your deck. Ideally, you're going through quite a few decks, putting them into your hand and going for either a Demonic Consultation, Thassa's Oracle line. So how do those bannings affect those win strategies? Having Dockside in your deck is pretty important. There were a couple bounce spells that were used. If you go for an Ad Nauseam line, you can cast Dockside to get some more resources to cast your win lines or cast Protection. And then you could bounce Ad Nauseam back to you could bounce Dockside back to your hand, recast it, get some more resources like that. So this was a very important piece of the Ad Nauseam strategy. Mana Crypt was also an important piece of the Ad Nauseam strategy, because when you're putting that many cards in your hand, you need a way to cast them, especially if you're casting Ad Nauseam on your main phase. So now how I've pivoted that strategy is focusing on casting Ad Nauseam at the end of my opponent's turn. So then I have all those cards in my hand and can have the mana available to cast them on my turn and hopefully win. How does Jeweled Lotus affect? Well, having an early Kraum is really good, believe it or not. Getting that card advantage engine going and dealing some combat damage to other Ad Nauseam decks is really helpful. And having an early Kraum, most of the time that I did that, it was with either Mana Crypt or Jeweled Lotus. And so I'm not gonna pivot on that strategy very much. If I can cast an early Kraum, then I'll try it. But the difference now is that I'll be pumping a lot more resources or cards into casting an early Kraum. That isn't the main win strategy, but it is a strategy used to get some card advantage that then can throw you into a win line or have more pieces to control your faster opponents. So those are the main ways that those bannings affect Tymna Kraum Blue Farm. A few cards that I have changed. I have added Mnemonic Betrayal. A lot of people already used this card. I'm also considering adding Urza's Saga to the deck. I know that the three things that I lost were mana advantage, and so I'm trying to put that back into the deck. So I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do for that. Perhaps it is a land that taps for 2 colorless, or perhaps it is, like I said, that Urza's Saga that can potentially get you another piece of mana advantage. Perhaps it's the Mana Vault, or perhaps it's your Soul Ring. But a few things like that are options, because Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, when you're using Ad Nauseam, they don't deal any damage to you when you put it in your hand. So my thought or rationale is to find some cards that have that same thought, where they're not going to impact my life total or my average converted mana cost. So I haven't put anything in the deck yet. I haven't changed it too much. If you check out my Moxfield list, you might see that Mana Crypt, or Jeweled Lotus, Dockside are still in there. And I would love to hear some of your thoughts of what you are doing to change your decks, or what you're using to replace those cards that were banned. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe.